Hi, welcome to This is How We Live Well, real stories that transform the way that we thrive. Today, I am joined by a very wise spirit, a scholar, spiritual leader, and cultural architect whose work unapologetically centers wellness, truth, and sovereignty for Black women. And today, she is here to help us live well on a soul level. Introducing EbonyJanice. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I like that introduction.
Of course, and it's real and it's true. So, to jump right in, I want to ask you to briefly describe fourth wave womanism to give a ground level introduction into your pedagogy.
Yes, fourth wave womanism is actually, I always say a so called fourth wave womanism because I'm thinking about the fact that womanism is such a young discipline and idea and theory as in its published, aspect that. Alice Walker introduced this term womanism in her 1983 In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. It's a four-part definition, and the fourth part of the definition says womanism is the feminism as purple is to lavender, and which is the love the whole definition, but I really grab hold of that part of it because it makes me think about the fact that womanism is Black women's deeper shade of purple, is Black women's
Mm.
womanist work, and so the focus, of course, is thinking about gender, is thinking about Black women specifically, is centering Black women, but it's very unique in that it's also thinking about spirit in its definition. It's thinking about all these things. So womanist theologians, which is my entry into womanism, womanist theologians in the first wave really were thinking about grabbing hold of this terminology and thinking about Christian scholarship. We're thinking about Christian theology. And basically, the womanists were saying, the OG womanists, the first wave womanists were saying that we have been thinking about Black liberation theology as introduced by Dr. James Cone, but we understand that there is something missing from this conversation, that there is our Black femme experience is very unique inside this Black liberation conversation, Black liberation theology conversation. So the first wave womanists really were introducing the defining of it. Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon was thinking about the fact that, Black women scholars, we need to get tenure, we need to publish, we need to really coin this language and understand what we're talking about when we say that God was thinking very specifically about Black women, and here's how we're fleshing out this text to understand it. And then the second wave womanists come in and they add more to the canon, and then the third wave womanists come in, and along the way they're talking about Afrofuturism, and they're talking about technology, and they're talking about maybe not just Christianity, as a matter of fact. And so the reason why I say a fourth wave womanism is because a so-called fourth wave womanism is because this so-called fourth wave is thinking about all of those things as well. However, we don't necessarily assert that there needs to be a pulpit in order for us to do this work, that our preachment doesn't have to necessarily come from a traditional pulpit. In fact, we understand most specifically in this wave that it might in fact be our social media platforms, that there is a sermon happening in the caption, that there is deep work happening. In fact, I brought up Dr. Katie Geneva Cannon talking about publishing and tenure because we don't even necessarily think in this way that you have to be a scholar in a traditional sense, that there is a lot of deep academic thought work happening in these pulpits called our social media platforms or our newsletters or the ways that we're creating here, even these spaces like podcasts. And it's not specifically Christian, but the overall tenets that we're thinking about is dreaming, rest, ease, pleasure, play, joy, healing, the ancestral in a deep way. And again, I always continue to name it a so-called fourth wave because the first wave womanists are alive and they are also thinking about those things as well. It just so happened that we're really honed in on ease and dreaming and rest and pleasure and play. And I say we because what I saw as a fourth wave was happening as, people were focused on rest, as liberation. People were focused on pleasure. People were focused on Black women and deep breathing and all of these things we were saying not as supplemental to our revolutionary work or to our, theological work, but that it is our actual focus and our actual work. You said briefly introduce fourth wave womanism, but it feels impossible to not give some background.
No, it's so perfect. Thank you so much. And I actually wanted to move in a few different directions. We talk about pleasure in
Mhm.
fourth wave womanism. And I don't remember the Black woman who said it, and I will, and I'll put this in here because citations are important,
Mhm.
um, about moving from a place of wetness.
Huh.
um,
Audre, is it Audre Lorde?
it's
No, no, no. It's actually someone contemporary.
it's
Who said,
someone contemporary.
I've heard.
And when she first talked about it, it was on a platform kind of like this. She was either being interviewed or being the interviewer. And she talks about how we feel and how we move when
Huh.
we tap into our pleasure in that way. We show up just so soft and just so fierce and powerful. And I was wondering your thoughts about that and how it relates to the work that you are doing.
I love that. Yes, I don't know her name, but it's a Black woman that was on a podcast and
Yes.
very beautiful. She has perfect teeth. I'm just seeing her. And she said, "Oh no, I love that." As soon as I heard that, I thought that is so perfect because it really is thinking about. I'm thinking a lot about a somatic movement and embodiment. And, I use this language from M. Sean Copeland about enfleshing. M. Sean Copeland wrote the book Enfleshing Freedom, and I really love the word enfleshing. It's basically, in my own definition, in my understanding, is putting on, like making this thing flesh, this idea, this concept. How do I make it flesh? How do I make it tangible? How do I make it something more than just theory? And so when I think about moving from a place of wetness, that is like such a profound way to enflesh pleasure, and to is to say I'm not just pursuing pleasure, I'm actually thinking about what my body would feel like and be doing in this moment in order for me to really operate fully. Before you press record, we were talking about academia, and we are talking about some of the frustrations that we experience as Black women in particular. And saying that I pick and choose. I'm in a place in my life where I really pick and choose when I'm going to be, Harriet Tubman, and when I'm really just going to go lay down. And part of that really is when you enflesh this idea and you think about moving from a place of wetness. Imagine I'm in a classroom and the instructor is being ashy and racist, and maybe there's a bit of maybe there's a bit of misogynoir specifically happening, right? Because there are only a few Black women in the class, and we're experiencing the brunt of some of what's happening. And EbonyJanice is sitting here, and I'm moving this entire experience from a place of wetness. It
Mm-hmm.
really does make me giggle, actually, to think about how dry you are sitting over there trying to throw shade at me, when the reality is your entire identity moves because of Black girl culture. So it changes everything for me. It really shifts my body, it shifts what I'm feeling, it shifts my energy, and I get to decide from my higher self, or a higher version of myself, how I actually want to deal with this racist ashy experience that's happening, versus I'm not fully seated in my body. I'm not fully, showing up as myself. And now I'm reactionary versus she couldn't actually touch me in her best days, right?
No,
This
she really couldn't with a 10-foot pole.
right.
And for me, it feels like everything slows down. I don't know,
Mhm.
that's akin to the Matrix, what it is,
I love
but like it's like you're waiting for me to respond. The
yeah.
universe is like, what are you going to do? And I say,
Huh.
oh, okay, well, oh, maybe I'll take a nap.
Yeah.
Or okay, actually maybe I'll
Huh.
buck up. But it's like it's all on my time.
I love
And
that.
that's what I love about moving from a place of wetness. And I feel like you said, so seated and so rooted in who I am and my soul authority.
Mhm.
I also believe that you use the term enfleshing, or something akin to the flesh, when you talked about God,
Mhm.
um, being more of God. You said God is the ocean. You said God is thunder. How can we be fuller versions of God in that way? What does it mean to be God as ourselves?
That is such a thick question. The
Mm-hmm.
first thing I thought about is it actually does go back to the first thing you said, this moving from a place of wetness. The language of embodying, you know, I I I'm probably jumping us here early, but I want to talk about a regulating nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
not regulating because we're potentially on the verge of a war, World War III, right?
Yeah.
And we're, no matter what anybody says, we are not post COVID. And, we are dealing with a tyrant as, one of the most powerful human beings in the world. And
Right.
so it is not necessarily a reality that you will ever have a regulated, that's the end of the conversation, nervous system. We are
Mm-hmm.
doing the work of pursuing a regulating nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm connecting this to this question about being God, because in my imagination, and so I introduce, this fourth wave of womanism, and I talk about dreaming, as a major tenet of this fourth wave of womanism, because I believe that when God created the everything, God used its sovereign divine imagination to dream up what it is that we're experiencing in this reality that we see on a daily basis. And because we are created in the image of the divine creator, we also have the same capacity then to speak and see things come into existence, to dream, to imagine. And so using my imagination and my dreaming, I really think about, I imagine a lot, what was God thinking when God, created this, or what was God imagining? How did God's imagination, bring this to pass? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's that I think, well, what do I need then as God, as the manifestation of God's body in this earth? What do I need
Mm-hmm.
in this moment to shift this? What could I grab? What could I grasp hold of in the ether to maneuver in this situation or in this experience, no matter how pleasurable or how, painful this experience might be. I think about what I use my imagination to think, really, what would God do?
Mm-hmm.
How would God shift this? How would God? And I believe that, again, connecting this to a regulating nervous system, because and moving from a place of wetness, because it forces me to slow down. I love that you said that, moving from a place of wetness, connecting that to slowing down. It forces me to slow down. It forces me to respond more slowly. It forces me to be more intentional. It forces me to think about myself. How do I want to feel in this moment?
Mm-hmm.
What do I want to do in this moment? Not a reactionary. I'm not living a reactionary life.
Right.
Even amongst chaos in the world, of a pursuing a regulating nervous system is me slowing down enough to say, what do I actually want? What do I want to feel? What do I need in this moment? Here's one embodiment, and this is about to get slightly vulgar, but it's real. Sometimes before I have to do a lot of talking in my day, and I'm a super introverted person, I really have a maximum word count that comes out of me on a daily basis. And so, but maybe I still got calls, maybe I still got stuff to do, I still got work to do, and so I have to interact with people, and my energy may be really low. I'll masturbate before I get on the call, because I want to feel, good. I want to come from the highest place that I can actually, curate or create for myself within myself before I go to be a decent human being with other human beings, right? And so, what are tangible things that I can do to slow myself down, or to bring myself up, or to create and curate the experience that I want to have? And so this is God body. This is God. This is like using my imagination, using, the creative tools that I have, at my disposal, to say, I'm in charge of EbonyJanice. You're not in charge of EbonyJanice. No matter what you showed up with today, even if you showed up with a bad attitude, even if you showed up and you were throwing shade, even if you showed up and you cannot dictate, you're not in charge of God. You cannot dictate who it is that I'm going to be in this moment, because I've done such deep work to be in my body, to be fully seated in myself, to show up how I want to feel. That it's you're gonna have to do a lot of work to knock me off of that. So again, I'm connecting that to God and to a regulating nervous system, because it's me doing the work of, how do I want to feel in this moment? What feels good in my body, and what tools do I have at my disposal to create that feeling, to curate that feeling, and to manifest that on a consistent basis.
That is so beautiful and so profound because before I got on this podcast, I had to sit and pray.
Mm-hmm.
And it's allowing God to wash over me and say, I love you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the nerves go away. It's the reminder that you're aligned. It's the reminder that you aren't by yourself. And so I really want to talk more about the practices that we can use to regulate our nervous system throughout the day. So when I do is prayer work, especially in the morning, and I just launched a wellness circle for women who build. And we talked a little bit about that. It's for the weekend, but it's a way to root us back into our soul and self authority. Because
Mm-hmm.
I feel for my personal self that when I get to the weekend, it's no longer nourishment, it's collapse. So,
Mm-hmm.
how do I still show up as myself and the woman that I am becoming through the weekend without resorting back to vices or behaviors that don't support that? How do we maintain who we are becoming?
I want to say that I have so many tools, and this is my deep passion for people, period, but particularly for Black women, to get you a toolkit, have it prepared so that you know that you have something to reach for in the moments when you need to be fully seated in yourself, to sit down. And I mean that literally, not the clenching or the lifted up or, in the defense mode, but to really feel like you're sitting down in your seat, and your entire body. If I said to relax your shoulders and you relax your shoulders, and then I said relax them some more, if you could, as much as you can, go down into that seat, imagine living your life from that place. And and all the Black girls are activists, I talk about Toni Morrison as one of my softness archetypes, and I call it the seat of Toni. The seat of Toni is a place that I strive for so frequently, because Toni Morrison could say these really hard things from her fully seated self. It's not that anxious, what you're talking about, before you get on a podcast and you have your nerves, whatever, and your nerves can sometimes cause your voice to shake, or it can cause your body to feel clenched up. That I imagine Toni Morrison and as this softness archetype in this seat, fully seated. She is deep exhaled, and the thing that's at the end of that exhale is how Toni Morrison existed in the world. And so I've used that as my imagination and as a tool that I reach for often. Who would I be in this moment if I was in the seat of Toni, if I was in my fully seated self? And it changes my voice. I've just done it in this moment. It changes my voice. It changes my calm. It slows down the racing in my brain. It makes the assumption that I am authorized, that I'm credible, that I already know what I'm talking about, that I don't have to rush, that I don't have to impress. All of those things are sitting there with me at the end of that deep exhale, and when I relax my shoulders and I'm fully in my seat. And so some of the tools, so that's one, like I built this archetype in my mind, and now I reach for the archetype. I use my imagination to think, what would Toni Morrison do? How is she fully seated? What tools has she used? But another major tool that I reach for is my boundaries. And one of my primary boundaries, and you just so happen that the times that you had available, it was best for me to do the morning. But one of my boundaries is I actually don't talk to human beings before 11 a.m. if at all possible. And part of the reason why I do that is because I create and curate the first part of my day to just belong to me. Now I understand that there are people who work a 9 to 5, and that's not a reality. So I fully recommend waking up maybe a little bit earlier, and/or setting aside a part of your day, even if you have a family, even if you have children, setting aside a part of your day that literally just belongs to you. It solely belongs to you. And one of the reasons why I said that, I know that I'm speaking of this from a place of privilege as a business owner who doesn't have children, and I'm unmarried, but I don't have children out of my body. I got kids. So live 8 minutes around the corner from me. They call me on a regular basis. Auntie Eb, can you? And also my godson lived with me when he was till the age of 3, basically. And so my godson, I had these prayer alarms on my phone. They would go off every 4 hours. And this baby at 3 years old understood the prayer alarm. That when the prayer alarm went off, he would hear it and he would say, it's time to pray. And what he understood as at 3 years old, what he understood about that was his Ebony had created a boundary. He didn't have that language, but had created a boundary, and there was a sound that went along with that boundary that let him know exactly what his Ebony was about to be doing in this moment. And he would get quiet and he would chill. And we could be at the altar. I'm talking about even at church, we could be at the altar. The ushers would come and try to get him from me sometimes, but they didn't know that I had raised this baby to understand that when it's time to pray, this is the way we behave. This is what we do. This is how we exist. And so I'm saying that to say that even within your own family, even within your own community, you can create a sound, or you could create a moment, or you could create a time, curate a time that your family understands. And you have to enforce it to the extent that they understand it, but that your family understands, even if they not about to participate in the thing that you're about to do. That baby understood when the prayer alarm went off, it's time to pray. So we certainly do that. So when it comes to 11 a.m., I've been doing this 11 a.m. boundary for probably about 4 years now. So sometimes I'll get a phone call from somebody in my family before 11 a.m. and I answer the phone, because not because I'm dishonoring my boundary. I'm answering the phone because I want to trust that whoever is calling me, this is an actual thing that's necessary, right? And so I'll answer the phone sometimes before 11 a.m. And let's say it's my older sister, she'll be like, I know it's earlier than 11, but I was calling to, and 9.5 times out of 10, it really is a thing that, I needed to answer the phone to deal with this as, as a family member, as a community member. But they have finally learned it. They used to try it. They would try it so hard. But I'm closing out this, the tools. This a part of this regulating nervous system. Part of the reason why I have this 11 a.m. morning boundary is because I can't even be nice to myself yet, let alone to you. So I'm doing this work of actually sitting with myself before I hop online, before I do all these other things. I spent time with myself. Maybe I'm listening to a book, or maybe I'm reading a book, or maybe I go and lay in the bathtub, or maybe I go for a walk. I have these things that I'm doing. I've, created this expansive, dramatic tea ritual in the morning. For me, what I do with my tea, and it's very dramatic. It's the kettle on the stove, and, the actual herbs in the tea thing, and the honey with the little, it's very, very dramatic, because it really is. It's not about the drama. It's really about, I'm spending time with EbonyJanice before I go and give all of my time and energy to someone else. And so by the time I'm talking to somebody else or engaging with other human beings, it's going to be a lot more difficult for you to knock me off my square and to pull me out of my seat than it would if I just woke up first thing in the morning and was like, hey, Christina, what's up? I give myself time to ease into the day. And there are so many others, that we can, have more conversation about that into the future. But there's so many other things. But I think profound boundaries for yourself about how you exist on a daily basis, meaning that you actually spend time with yourself, give yourself time on a daily basis to interrogate who it is that you are, and how you want to show up in a day. And then the other thing that I said is creating an archetype, finding an archetype for you around your softness, or around your seatedness, or around who is somebody that is in your personal life, as a matter of fact, that they just be chill all the time, and begin to interrogate and ask questions like, how you always be so chill? What does that look like? What is, and use them as your archetype, so that you have somebody to reach for when you're thinking about, how do I want to exist in this moment? How do I want to feel in this moment? And what tools would I have to reach for in order for me to be able to actually be in that seat?
That's so profound, because from what you talked about at the very beginning about having a toolkit to draw from, so you're never scrambling, the archetype of the woman who you are becoming, a chill, non-reactive person, makes sense. And we're so grateful that you can say, oh, okay, let me move back into that space. It
Mm-hmm.
reminds me of what Queen Afua says about birthing yourself as a woman,
Mm-hmm.
and the beauty of who you are becoming. Um, And I think that so perfectly aligns because you're giving yourself the space to do that as soon as you wake up, and you are curating your environment so nothing can penetrate that.
Uh-huh.
um, I want to close by saying this. Speaking of creating, what does creative wellness look like for you? And that can be through your poetry, through writing your books, speaking, um, honoring your self-expression. How do you what does that process look like in a way that honors the flow of EbonyJanice?
Mm-hmm. I am a major ritual girl. I love to turn everything into a ritual. I talked about how I am with my tea. It's very dramatic because in this season of kind of, just figuring out who the heck I am now and who am I now and who am I now. One of the things I realized is that I didn't grow up really feeling my feelings. And, I just was very well behaved and did what was appropriate. And that meant really not honoring my feelings, not really feeling my feelings deeply. And that's not just my sadness, even my joy. I didn't feel my joy very well. There's some Capricorn stuff in this too. It's not just my trauma. There's some Capricorn stuff in this too. Capricorns are very hard to be, it's very difficult for us to be satisfied. And so we arrive at a destination and then we just feel like, well, did that,
Yeah.
how hard it was. We don't celebrate very well. That really is a thing that I think earth signs in general, but particularly Capricorns, we are the worst when it comes to that. But on top of that, also some childhood trauma. And so I had this moment in 2020. I was living in New Orleans at the time. And I had this moment where I realized that I needed to stop and feel my feelings about something. And I said that out loud to myself, like, I'm gonna go feel my feelings about this. and and that was really kind of the beginning of me creating rituals for everything. That when my heart is overwhelmed, that I give myself a place to go do something with those feelings. It isn't just I can't just say it, I'm acknowledging my feelings. I have to go feel my feelings. So I will like build playlists that, if they're like the happy, I have a make myself cry playlist. It's very dramatic. I have like if I'm feeling very sensual, it's called the sexy sex music playlist. I have
Mm-hmm.
playlist. I have playlists really for everything. I have like my deep prayer. I have a prayer list called the Churchy Church playlist, where it's like the old, like at the altar, songs. And then I have a playlist that I use when I sit with plant medicine. And, so sometimes I'll sit at my altar with plant medicine and I'll pray. But it's a mix between like Moses Sumney and Karen Clark Sheard. So it's like a lot of different energies. But I literally, so I've talked about the playlist, but there's also, I mentioned my tea ritual, and I mentioned like there is a thing that I do to when I lay in the bathtub. I have this is the thing that I do when I'm still being very Capricorn even in this season, right? Like I have a thing to do, So I like, but I really call it a destination. It's a place that I go to feel this feeling, to do this thing, to be in this experience, to embody this thing that I'm intending. And so, and the last thing I'll say about that is there's also a lot of body work, a lot of somatic work, whether that's walking just so that I can, breathe deeper to, get my adrenaline pumping, all the things, whatever. And, or if it's in my prayer room, there's a huge mirror in there, and I go in there and sometimes I just have my panties and my bras and sometimes I twerk, but usually I just kind of white girl wind, it's when you throw your hands in the air and just,
I
you know,
know it.
yeah, do a little white girl wind. And
Mm-hmm.
so yes, so a lot of somatic movement, but even that is like, there is a place, there is a thing I need to, be in this. So I will go to this place to do this thing, and I build ritual around it so that I really am sure that I really was feeling, I'm sad, let me go be sad. I am glad, let me go be glad. I am, experiencing pleasure, let me go be in the pleasure. It's a place.
Well, thank you so much for rooting us back into our softness. Your work is healing. It is one of the many roadmaps we have to bring us back to ourselves. And it is so needed on this journey of Black womanhood. I am grateful.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for saying those kind words.
Of course. This is where we end. Thank you for being here.